Next thing is you see there are two people and I'm just one. So my colleague, he couldn't travel. He broke his rib, and the airline wouldn't let him travel. So you have to go with half the show. But I'll try my best to take you through this presentation. It will give us a right, like understanding the next iteration of sponsorship from our perspective. And we will look into 3 showcases with 3 brands. One is Adidas, the other one is Hyundai, and the third one is Fox Sports. But let me give you a little bit of an intro. So my colleague who isn't here is representing an agency, a creative agency, one of the most successful creative agencies, called Jung von Matt. And they were very eager to think about, like what I just said, like the next iteration of sponsorship. Where does impact, where does purpose play a role when we think about brand investment moving forward? And I'm representing Common Goal, which I co-founded like 7 years ago. Common Goal is an impact-driven movement within football. We believe in the power of football to change lives. And what we try to establish is a 1% contribution of every euro that is generated thanks to commercializing the game, investing it in impact collectively to make it as efficient as possible. We started out with athletes contributing 1% of their salaries. Then we went to coaches, we went to other professionals within the industry, also clubs who contribute 1% of their stadium revenues, and then to brands who contribute 1% of their sales or whatever their product or their service is. But we'll get deeper into that because all 3 showcases are related to that. The 1% reference has a thought behind and a belief behind, which we call radical collaboration. We believe very much that in order to tackle the challenges of our times, it being climate change, it being gender equity, it being whatever, like overwhelmingly sized problem we face in the world, can only be tackled if we learn to collaborate in a new way, and we call it in a radical way. And the 1%, therefore, is very little for everyone, because you continue with a 99. But if everybody does it, it's a lot, but it takes everyone. So that is like the philosophy behind the 1%. Let's see if this now works. It doesn't. Do I have to do magic or? Oh, here we go. So with the agency and ourselves as a movement, what we decided is to build sort of a joint venture without it being a new organization, but just like a collaboration. And we call it temporary because it's supposed to be temporary. We don't want to be there forever. We want to be there for say 6 years. You see the 30 in there. And by then we either have accomplished what we need to accomplish or we don't, but we will disappear as a collaboration. And if we're not successful collectively as humanity, probably the world will disappear. So 2030 is our date, and the call is to everyone to get behind it. So let's talk about like the world and change. I already talked about like what it takes from our point of view in order to make real progress. I'm just coming from the climate conference, and it's really frustrating because you have such a positive energy in the room and everybody wants to do something, but at the end of the day it fails because people just don't agree on what needs to be done, and it's really frustrating. And if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they are close to be failing in a lot of senses because of that reason, because we as humanity, we never have learned to really collaborate in a way that we all feel part of something bigger than ourselves. We very much focus on our organization, on our lives, on our individual interests, but we very, very rarely think about, okay, what's my role in order to achieve something I can't achieve by myself, where I need everybody else to be part of. And this is where football comes into place. This kind of collaboration, from our point of view, doesn't happen by itself. It needs to be enabled. And football obviously offers an incredible metaphor, because we all know that a football team with 11 Messis won't be successful, with 11 goalkeepers either. So we need everybody on this team to play his and her role in their specific position. And this is what we use, obviously, when we talk about the radical collaboration. So don't, if you're a defender, don't pretend to be Messi. Be a defender and do it well. So that's sort of the approach. And then there's obviously more to football, because it could obviously be another team sport, is the reach. Like nothing else, football obviously gets into every kitchen worldwide, every father-son, father-daughter, mother-son conversation, every corner office in the world. Like football is just everywhere, every day and multiple times a day, and it speaks to people's emotions. And that's just like unequaled, and therefore football has a role to play. And if it has this role to play, it must play it. There is no other thing such as football to play that role. But it's not just because of responsibility, it's also because of relevance and resilience at the end of the day. Obviously, if we today say like football might not exist as it does, as we know it today, in the future, it's hard to believe because it's such a successful business. But if we look at the numbers, if anything, any brand, any phenomenon doesn't stay close to the people they are supposed to be serving or selling their products, it will get very hard. Either to get talent into your organizations, because people don't want to join any more organizations that are not aligned with their values. To get consumers, same thought behind. You get investors, brands, sponsors. If there's no value alignment, it will be a hard time. And you have seen in the past examples where just investments didn't happen because of it. And obviously the ESG imperative, there will be regulatory frameworks that will require it to be like that. So now what is the role of brands in all of this? What I just said, like referring to football, it also applies to obviously brands, and increasingly with the Gen Z. I don't think I need to repeat that in the room. We have a very high percentage of citizens that expect brands to behave in a certain way, that also expect football to behave in a certain way. And with the Gen Z, it just increases. So consumers, same applies to fans. Both consumers and fans are obviously what brands are interested in. So what I just as a challenge put out there, media, digital, fans that are often put as like the core of what it is all about. We very much believe that it's about impact, and that will then lead to fan, media, digital, the use of technology in order to leverage it. Now looking at what we call impact sponsorship and the three examples. Now before that, maybe three imperatives I would want to highlight, and this is now the part Robert is meant to talk about, so please bear with me if I'm not going too far into depth. But one is the value alignment. You saw that, for example, Chelsea at the beginning of the season, they didn't have a shirt sponsor. You now see that a super German brand doesn't get behind the Euro in 2024. So that there is signs of where the value alignment is just not in place and things don't happen. The second is actually the longevity of what you do. Like if you go, next year there's a Euro, 2 years later there's a World Cup, and I do a project here and a project there, might not be the way. If you look at successful campaigns, what you see is longevity, like that comes with credibility and authenticity. So the P&G example with Thank You Mom around the Olympics obviously was an important example. And the third is like, how do you prove that you really mean what you do and that you really mean what you say? So proof points as a third element to take into consideration. Now, how does that translate into the three case studies? And I'm rushing a bit because we started so late. So Adidas, I mentioned the 1% example. What Adidas committed to actually, instead of what they initially or most of the brands have done in the past, still do, like project by project invest. They agreed to contribute 1% of the global net sales of their balls, like the footballs, like every football. Which is an interesting example to go. It's because you embed purpose and impact in your business model. So the more successful you are as a brand, the more you contribute. And on the other side, we then can take care to collectively invest as efficient as possible. So 1% of the ball sales is Adidas' commitment, and then they can work around that. The goal is 100 million young lives to be impacted by 2030. Obviously, with 1% of the ball sales, that doesn't work, but what Adidas wants to do with that 1% is to inspire others to follow. So we're looking at the goal set of 100 million young lives to be impacted by 2030. And then behind that, there is concrete impact frameworks around gender equity, racial justice, or social inclusion, in this case of Adidas. The translation in that does work sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. Okay. The translation into campaign in the Adidas case was then to translate it into what they called the game has two halves, to connect the men's World Cup in Qatar with the women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. So at the end of the World Cup in Qatar, they put out half a ball because they wanted to tell the people that we're only looking at half of the game, because the other half would happen then in Australia and New Zealand in the next year. So that, like the fact that there is authenticity, credibility behind the commitment of Adidas allows them to talk about it in a very credible way. One of the focus areas was social inclusion, as I said, in this case LGBTQ plus inclusion. So here 2 Adidas clubs then took on the artwork that would represent this cultural diversity, and they just performed their games with such an inspired number on their back. That was at the Rose Bowl in the US the year before last. Hyundai. Very difficult example because obviously it's automotive. The topic of sustainability and automotive doesn't go really together. And then the World Cup in Qatar that had also like their reputational issues. And now how do we create a campaign that would like tick the same boxes as I mentioned before in the Adidas examples and in general, which is authenticity, which is longevity, and which is the proof points embedded in it, was then to really translate that into like the connection between okay, we have a massive challenge, which is climate emergency. We ourselves as a company, we have a plan 2045, we want to be carbon neutral. How can we build something towards it that would inspire others to follow, because we know we can't do it by ourselves. And then the result of that was what they called the goal of our century. Obviously a lot of possibilities that offers because of the different meanings of goal. And what they did then in terms of the 1%, they pledged 1% of their sponsorship fee to the FIFA World Cup. So the 1%, as you can see, is very flexible to be applied to different situations. If we could play the video, please. Just to give you a bit more colorful back.
The World Cup. Everyone's watching. Big brands, bigger business, the biggest sponsorship deals.
Crazy, it's beautiful.
All there for the same thing. Sell more, shift more, save more. While all the big brands use the World Cup to draw attention to their products to make more, we redirected the world's attention to this. Less CO2, less emissions, less waste, less plastic. We kicked it off, built a team. That's BTS, and yes, they rewrote that song.
The goal of the century is here.
Then Stephen Gerrard made his pledge for the planet.
Liverpool legend Steven Gerrard just pledging to plant 500 trees for each one of England's goals.
지속 가능한 세상을 위한.
Then he asked the world to make their pledge.
19th century.
And the world showed up. Avijit from Mumbai and the boys used one TV for the whole month, even to watch their favourite soaps. Michelle from Southampton unplugged her washing machine for 6 weeks. Christina from Korea, Yasmin from Oman, and Wesamel from Agadir went vegan, even though he's a butcher. Plus a few friends too, even a Cristiano.
This is my very much vegan meal, contributing to a better world.
When we wanted less, we got more. Most talked about brand. Most loved brand. And one final pledge to the world. When everybody put their logo first, we put Earth first.
That was just an example of how it played out for Hyundai in the context of the Qatar World Cup. And here it's just like more examples of what has already been said in the video. So I don't think I go too far into this. If you're interested, please just talk with me afterwards. There's obviously then faces, there's personalities that then back the whole thing across different cultural facets, from football to arts to music, etc. Nadia Nadim, I think she's actually here. Then it could be taken to the Women's World Cup, where then they dove into like the whole history of women's football that was in big parts unknown to the world, and just could add gender equity as another facet of the big challenges we are facing, and allowed like 40 young female leaders across the world to come together and actually build pathways into the football industry from a leadership perspective. Last example, and then we finish with that, is Fox Sports. Here the pledge was 1%. Initially it was 1% of their airtime, which is interesting. And the production related to that, and I'll show an example of the production just afterwards to round it up. And interestingly, in this case, after the commitment of 1% of the airtime, followed a financial invest without us actually asking for it, because they just felt it's worth it. It plays out for them. So that is also an interesting example. It doesn't happen too often, or in our experience hasn't happened too often. So it's multi-year. As I said, it needs longevity. The Women's World Cup was where it played out. That was actually then together with Hyundai, the support of the Female Young Leaders Summit at the World Cup, which we framed Festival 23. And this would then be the final video, and in order to gain some time, I would finish here and hope it has contributed, and thanks again for the patience at the beginning that it took a little longer to get started. Thanks very much.